Life is made up of moments, some great ones, some terrible ones. Moments make up the man or woman. What do you do to prepare for that? What do you do when it has arrived? What do you do when it has passed? You don't make the moments make you. This is the Muamba Moments. We're here on the very first episode of the Muamba Moment Show with the one and only Michael Pinball Clemons. Thank you so much for coming here today.
Thank you so much. And what a moment this is for me, right? Being with you. I'm very appreciative. Thank you.
We want to get to know who Pinball was before he became Pinball. Who is Michael Clemons?
When we talk about who people are and the essence of who people are, I think there's a part of you that's ever evolving, right? Especially if we're doing it right, because we keep growing. I always say your best is always good enough, right? But your best should get better. If your best a year from now is the same as your best today, right? Then you probably haven't been doing your best all the way through, because your best should get better. So while we're these ever-evolving creatures, I do believe that there are some things that inherently are part of who we are, right? We as people don't change as much as we grow. Right? We're always talking about, you want to change somebody, right? Listen, it's hard to change people, right? If you like music, right, when you were younger, you're probably going to like it when you're older. Your taste in music, it probably might going to change a little bit, shift, but you probably still like music, right? And so it's not so much the changing, it's the growing. And so if I can look at me as a child, from a very early age, my mom brought us up in the church, and there's an old gospel song that says, "I'm just a nobody, trying to tell everybody about somebody who can save anybody," right? And so at the basis of it, I love God and I'm a Christian, right? And that really drives who I am. And I don't know how other people sort of add that up, right? Because that could have a positive or negative connotation, right? But basically, God is love. And so if it doesn't deal with love, it doesn't deal with God, right? So anything that any symbol or any depiction of being a Christian or being religious that you have that doesn't involve love is not the God that I serve, right? And so in saying that, what I love most is just to love on people. I think that's why we're here. I think that's all about it. It starts with your own family, right? And loving on your own family, loving those around you. And so at a very cursory level, right, I am a child of God, and on a daily basis, my job is to just try to love on people.
Now, if we look at your life and what you've accomplished to this day, I'm interested to know, where did it start? Where did it begin? Was it with your parents, siblings? What is it that started everything for you?
When we talk about the start, right, it's hard to say what the real evolution is, but at some point I was born to a single parent, and we lived in the projects. And my mom's mom died when she was 5. Her grandmother died at 7. So before I was born, there was a pattern that was set up, right, that presented some challenges, some hurdles, some things to get over. But my mom didn't make excuses. She knew excuses are just like belly buttons. Everyone's got one, and none of them are any good, right? So don't make excuses. Instead of making excuses, she really put a real focus on education. Education was vital in our success, and my mom really is the biggest influence in my life, right? As a kid, I could always run, right? But she focused on education. I loved sports from a very young age and was always good at sports, could always run, right? But she really put the focus on education. She supported me in all of my sports. I mean, she missed only one game from the time I was 8 years old to the time I was 18. And so she was always there, but the emphasis was still education. If I got a C, I couldn't play sports. And I tell my kids, a C is not this thing you call a C today. A C was a 75 to an 84. So my marks had to be 85 or above in order to play sport. And so she put that real focus, that real attention to detail, that thriving to be excellent all you do, not just some of what you do. So from a character standpoint, she really, really was very strong about how you treat people. One of the greatest lessons I got was as a kid. One game I had scored 4 touchdowns, and then and had only touched the ball 4 times, right? Still the first half. The 5th time I got the ball, I was off and running again, and the coach was like, "Get out of bounds, get out of bounds." He had realized that we're running up the score on this team, and so I kind of got it at some point, and so I went out of bounds, and then I went to the sideline, and I stayed on the sideline for the rest of the game. Well, I guess I was getting a little bit of an attitude because I played offense, I played defense, I was even the kicker, right? So I was on the field all the time. So I had started to pout a little bit, not on the field, and my mom came down and she said, "Son, your teammates love you, right? They love to see you have success." And she says, now this week, right, when you've already had a chance to play and you have a chance to cheer for them, says you're here pouting. She says, if you don't become the best cheerleader on this field for the second half, she says you'll never touch the field again. And it's that whole idea of cheering for people, rooting for people, being behind your team, understand. So that was one of the very first team lessons I got, and in receiving that message, really kind of, and my mom tells me that I've always had that spirit, but that competitive fire burns deep, and so something about competition that can take us off our game, if you will. And she said, still, as you compete, you still have to be a gentleman.
Then what would you say to someone who has reached a crossroad in their life and they have multiple options to pick from? How did you choose yours? Does it have to do with passion, or is it just a choice?
I think there's a few ways to go, right? I actually tried to take a combination of passion and pragmatism, right? So the pragmatic route was to choose a school that was a highly rated school academically. And so I chose to play football, right? But I didn't go to a football school. I chose to go to more of an academic school, the College of William and Mary in Virginia. That's the second oldest school behind Harvard. Had a chance to go to both Harvard and Columbia as well. And so with that, what that allowed me to do is to play what I love, but also give me the balance of going to a school that would maybe give me a little bit of a head start in the race for a job, the competitive market that is a job afterwards. And yeah, so for me, I did that. But there's nothing wrong with someone who says, I want to follow this football thing full speed, or instead, I want to do the academic. The key for me is making your decision correct. Yes. Right? It's not about what decision you make. It's about following through on that decision and making that decision the correct decision. Yeah. So follow through, being committed, and making sure that whatever we choose, we make that the right decision. Mm-hmm.
Now, with all the success that you have and that you've been able to achieve, what keeps you grounded?
Well, I often say that my greatest strength is I understand how important I'm not, right? And indeed, when you get past yourself, you can do something decent in the world, right? But that only works, right, when you understand your worth, right? Because when I say I understand how important I'm not, it talks about the insignificance. It takes security right? To be able to say that, though, because we have to understand. While I understand how important I'm not, that comes off the heels of understanding how important I am, right? And as athletes, we usually don't have a real challenge with understanding how important we are, at least to the physical world, the outside world. But we do struggle with security, right? And sometimes the guys with the biggest personalities, who we think are the most boisterous, conceited guys, are really people who are screaming out to say, hey, listen, I need to find a little bit more security. I'm not comfortable in I do all of this to say that I'm screaming out for help. And it really is, I used to tell my kids as they were growing up, one of the most important things is to learn to enjoy your own company, right? Yes. If you can learn to enjoy your own company, just have that piece of being all by yourself, that is, I think, one of the critical things with personal growth, development, and success. I talk so long, I don't know where this question started. Yeah, so, but yes, so for me, that grounded part comes in a few ways, right? It comes spiritually, yes. Understanding that we are all here for a reason. There's a purpose, right? That for me, I believe that we're not a mistake, right? The world will tell us we're a mistake. They'll say nothing was sitting around with nothing to do, right? So nothing says, you know what? I love it. I'm tired, or I'm tired of doing nothing, right? Yeah. So I'm gonna make something. Yeah. So nothing makes two huge rock masses bigger than the world itself, yeah. Right? And then these two huge rock masses collide together, boom! We call it the Big Bang Theory, of course, right? So if you think about that, nothing sitting around, nothing to do, nothing decides, you know what, I'm gonna make something, and nothing makes two huge rock masses bigger than the world itself, and then these two huge rock masses collide into each other, boom, and this big explosion happens, and everything burns up, and if you can imagine just all the fire and and then they say, well, down over here comes the Grand Canyon, yep. Right? Down over here comes Niagara Falls. Now it gets really, really good, because down over here comes a giraffe. Then it gets really tricky. Down over here comes Enoch. Yes. And down here comes Pinball. In the middle, there was a giraffe and a few animals as well. And I just believe that we're not a mistake. I'm okay with whatever anyone else believes, but I just believe that we're not a mistake. So I believe that there's a God of the universe who created us, and that there's a reason and a rhyme and a purpose for us to be here. So that's first, right? Secondly, growing up with immodest means, I've learned that inherently the greatest people I knew weren't the wealthiest people I knew. And it's interesting. There's a gentleman friend of mine who traveled with his family. He did middle retirement. He retired in the middle at 40 years old. He was fortunate enough that he was able to retire, and he traveled the 5 continents, I think his family went to, right? They would do a different continent every year, and they'd spend 3 or 4 months on that continent. And he talked about, as he went to different places, right? It was those places that were deemed the most dangerous, in places where people had less, that they were given the most. So the people who had the least gave them the most. They gave them the most time. They gave them of their own possessions. They fed them, helped do all of these. And so just amazing that our true worth, our true value is not in what we get, but what we give. There's a saying, we rise by lifting others. And so just having, I think, a peace of mind to know, and something that was sort of grounded in me in as a kid, that true greatness is well, one of the things I often say, if you want to show me a truly great person, don't tell me about records or awards, money or power. If you want to show me a truly great person, show me what that person has done for someone else. Yes. Therein lies true greatness. So having that security in what is a belief system, and then having that security in what you do, not who you are. So in a very physical, in a spiritual way, right? Having that own sense of security, and then in a physical way, understand what my mom was able to accomplish with modest means, and where I came from, and the opportunity that we ended up with really should have taught me that it's what you get out is what you put in.
Now, what does it look like making the right decision, the correct decision, when you don't necessarily know which decision is the right one?
So for me, making the correct one didn't mean going there the first year and being the only offensive player to make the travel squad. Mm-hmm. But I did. I was the only offensive player to travel, right, as a freshman. And what going there really meant is being able to get a job afterwards. And the very first summer, I got a job working with Honeywell, a multinational corporation, and I worked on the hand and flight controls for the space shuttle. Actually, the first year, I worked on an unmanned space vehicle called Space Shuttle Centaur. So it was just a really wonderful opportunity. I worked in the space program down in Clearwater, St. Petersburg at the Honeywell plant there. And so it was a real opportunity to grow. And I graded out at the top. I was in the 90th percentile, and they told me that I had a job every summer if I wanted. And so after my freshman, sophomore, and junior years, I went back every year, and they told me that they were going to pay for my MBA. So that's what it looked like. That's what making the decision right looked like. It looked like when I got the job simply because I was going to William and Mary. And people who are familiar with the College of William & Mary know that it's a great academic institution, the second oldest school in the nation, in North America, actually. And so because of that, someone who knew I played football, who worked at Honeywell, whose wife actually worked with my mom, said that, wow, he's smart too? Right? So tell him to come and see me. So we went and saw Mr. Bill Ely is his name, and he gave me this opportunity, and we were able to flourish in that opportunity. And so when I talk about the reason I chose it, right? So you asked me, I chose a pragmatic, I mixed passion with pragmatism, right? And it was the pragmatic choice that I pursued first. The football kind of happened.
Now, when you chose this path, what motivated you? What pushed you to continue to succeed on that path?
The football opportunity became really vivid after my senior year. My junior year was very inquisitive. I think I rushed for 1,000 yards and caught 60 some balls or something like that, and I also did kickoff return, and so kind of became a thing, if you will. And William & Mary, we played pretty good football. We winning record every year. Started at 6-5 the first year, and got a game better every year. 9-2 the final year. We upset the University of Virginia and some other schools, and so we had a pretty good run and playing pretty good football. And at this point, I realized that it was a possibility, but I was still this is actually when I was trying to protect myself, right? Because sometimes, right, the thing that keeps us from achieving our dreams is fear, right? And I think I was a little bit afraid. I had convinced myself that I was too small to play in the NFL, I think, right? And then once we started to play against these different schools, now it's like, okay, maybe I'm not too small, right? As a matter of fact, I knew I wasn't. But like, can you make the NFL, right? So I knew that I could compete, but I didn't know if I would prevail. And so I had this little protection thing. So when my coach said, there's some, teams that are asking about you, this was the beginning of my senior year, right? And I said, so coach, no, I'm not playing anymore after this. I've got a job. I was actually going to come back to William & Mary for the 5th year, right? I took one less class during the football season, and I was going to come back for one more year to play soccer and finish my collegiate career, because that was, the other sport that I was, at a college level on was soccer. And so I told him that, and he says, well, they're asking, right? And then the end of the year came, and it was a pretty special year, and things went really well, and there it became a little bit more obvious that something might happen. But my last game was the playoff game, so the 1AA playoff. So we were Division 1AA, not 1A. So we have a playoff system. And I got hurt in that last game. And it was interesting. I got a call from the guys who run the combine, and now make notice, this is 1987, okay, right? So the combine is not televised at this time. The combine doesn't have the richness and the candor that it does. It was still in Indianapolis, right? Still the same place, but it just didn't have that same. We didn't know about it, and especially at William & Mary, right? We didn't have guys who went to the combine at William & Mary, right? So the combine comes around, and the guy says, we've sent you some information out, and you haven't returned it. Says, we're just kind of making sure, right? I says, well, I did see something, but I'm not coming. And he says, what do you mean you're not coming? I says, well, I'm not coming. I actually have a job working at Honeywell. I'm not playing football anymore. I'm done with football, right, at this point, right? And he says, what do you mean? And so he starts telling me why I should come to the combine, why everybody wants to do, like you've worked hard for this. And so he's trying to convince me. I was like, you know what? I hurt my knee in the last game. I haven't run since that last game. So that was sometime either late last week of November, first week of December. I haven't run since then, and it's late January, maybe early February at the time, and so I'm making all of these excuses. He finally convinces me to go, and I was a little bit compromised, and I was able to I wasn't big into the weights, but I was able to pump 225 a few times and get it up 7 or 8 times or whatever it is, but whatever that was, I ended up getting through, and I wasn't the fastest and I wasn't the strongest, right? But when it came to the skills of the game, I was number one. I was rated the best of all when it came to the catching, the cutting, and the coach kept putting me up front, right, to be the example. This is how you do this, right? And so I end up being the guy who is the demonstration guy. This is how you run the route and cut, and this is what you do. And at that time, running backs were a little bit more static than they are today, yeah, right? We didn't do as much coming out of the backfield and those kinds of things. And William & Mary inadvertently had prepared me for that. So while I didn't go to a big football school, right, I went to a school where the coach was groundbreaking. We played a single back set, right, with one back and all receivers in 1984, 85, 86, right? So he was before his time. And so while I thought that this would give me an edge academically, it ended up giving me an unexpected edge athletically.
Now, you touched on something really good that I want to dive into. You mentioned doubt, and you're not particularly the biggest person in stature, so when we talk football, you're not the prototype. How did you deal with doubt? How did that affect you? Because a lot of people think that doubt is a sin, but it's more so what you do after you doubt. How did you deal with that?
Wonderful question. And, you know, if I look back to where I was at that time, the comfortable choice was working at Honeywell. I had done it. I had been competent. I'd been graded on it 3 consecutive summers, right? Had graded out at the top, right? Now, yes, I did have great numbers. I was a Division I AA All-American and all of those things, right? But it didn't say that I was the best, right? There was not just one AA, there was a 1A, right? And, you know, those guys played it. I had played against that level and I had succeeded at that level. I played against Bruce Smith, right? When he was the #1 draft choice for the Buffalo Bills and the big, defensive tackle. And I played against him at Virginia Tech as a junior and scored 2 touchdowns, right? And however, right, he had a much better showing than I did that day. But had played at the University of North Carolina when they were ranked #3 in the nation. Had played against Penn State. Not so effective in that one, but had played against the larger school and for the most part had excelled in those games. But there was still that bit of doubt, right? And I think it was more shielding my little ego, right? It's great to say, oh, I had a chance to play, but I decided to go to work, right? Yeah, I decided to take that job. When I understood there was a little legitimate chance, I think the thing that I was most afraid of is not getting a real shot. Once I understood that, okay, I went to the combine, I saw this, I see these guys, I'm running beside these guys, and I'm competing favorably against them side by side, you know, I was the drill guy. I was the guy who did it first, right, to show him how to do it. So I actually had that position of leadership, taking that. I don't know who the guy is. I wish I would be able to give the guy a call who actually sat on the phone and convinced me that day, and just kind of say, I think that my life would have gone in a very favorable direction, right, if I had chosen the other path, right. But just being able to experience what I have here, I think is the preferred decision. But even if it wouldn't have been, just the idea to get past that. So I think him taking that time, and then the coach making that example, and then you have the draft status, and this is where your talent is, right? And I fell down that scope, right, because of my size, right? So I had, from the skill testing, had first round talent, right? Had round 3 to 5, I had first round skills, 3 to 5 talent, because size and strength and all of that comes in when you get to the talent. So first round skills, 3rd to 5th talent, drafted in the 8th round. But I was drafted. And then, I say, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful, to be arrogant, or to take anything out of position, but the thing that I was most impressed about when I went to training camp, that first mini camp, was how great they weren't, right? And I don't mean that they weren't great. They were, right? It's just that I belonged. I was there too, right? And so I belonged had that realization. So I have to tell you that I don't think it was any great feat on my part, right? I believe that in this case, I was pushed. I don't think that I had that overwhelming charisma that told me yes. And It doesn't take me long now, but so when I got there and I saw, I see with my eyes. So yeah, I knew I belonged, right? But in terms of getting there, in terms of taking that first step, I think there were a lot of things that happened that influenced, that made that step for me, right? I don't know if I would have made that. Quite honestly, I just don't know if I would have made that step alone.
Right. So you had the right people around, people who kind of pushed you in the right direction.
So that there was, I had the right opportunities, right? Where I may not have had the opportunity to go to that school, right? Because the big schools said, you're too small, right? But there's another group of schools, there are another tier of schools that are great football schools that aren't Florida State or, and so. So that next group of schools I could have gone to a football school, but I chose to go to a school that gave me more balance, right? It gave me the academics and the sports, and I chose the academic route and had physically said, I'm going to go to Honeywell, I'm going to get my master's, and that's what my life is going to be look like. I had decided that already, even though I was doing well at football. And it was those different set of circumstances. But I want to say this. I think the only credit I could take is stewardship of the opportunities that I was given, right? I wasn't so afraid that I didn't perform on the platforms that I was given. And it was the performance on those platforms that continued to give me opportunity. But as far as sort of having that overwhelming, I can do this from round one, I think that disappeared somewhere in high school when the guys became a foot taller than me and 100 pounds more. When you're smaller, you're still smaller than everybody else, right? But you're only 4 inches smaller or 3 inches smaller, and you're 20 pounds lighter or 40 pounds lighter. Then one day they just got so big, and maybe this is not the thing for me, right? And so I do say, even when I started coaching, there was someone who prompted me to become the coach. There was someone who prompted me to become the president, the CEO. And when I get there, I'm good, but I'm not necessarily the prompt guy. And I think sometimes that has been a shyness. Insecure is way too strong a word for me. I'm a pretty secure guy, right? But there is a shyness about it. I could probably do it, but somebody else can too, right? It's not a big deal, right? And so not really aggressive in necessarily pursuing things maybe as much as some others are. So started as a player and played for 11 plus seasons. And in the middle of the season, I was asked to go from player to coach. Right. Not just the coach, but the head coach. Right. And I believe this is unprecedented in pro football history. Yeah, so it was an awkward situation. I said no at first, right? And that goes along with what is my temperament and the character, the decisions that had been made before that, right? That kind of goes alongside. And they told me to carefully consider it as I left the office that day, right? They told me to carefully consider that they were going to make a change and they wanted that change to be me, right? And that part was really awkward because now I'm offered my boss's job, right? But it was a, kind of a time, I guess, you got to ask at some point, right? And you got to know where you're going once you make the decision, right? So when that happened, when I think about what transpired there, I tried to be as pragmatic as possible, right, in making that transition, right? I went home and told my wife, she's like, no, you still want to play. Don't always do what other people want you to do. You're always doing what other people want you to do. And I said, I think it might be the right thing to do, though, right? The club has given me so much. The city, the country has given me so much. And I was, even at that time, many years before I became a Canadian citizen, I already felt like a proud Torontonian and a proud Canadian. When we went through the process, it just made it official, right? But I felt just so proud of all that I had been, all the opportunities I had been given, and I thought it was important at that time to make that sacrifice, even though I wanted to go back and train one more good year and give it my best and know it was going to be my last year and just kind of go out and kind of do it on my own terms, right? But the opportunity was where it was, and we took it, and it was an interesting transition, right? And I think if I have one time, the media has made consistently, even today, made me sound better than I am. I can never truly be, right? But that one time, right? If I have a challenge, that one time they just roasted me, right? Before we coached the game, I was like, hold on, man, at least let me mess up first, right? Yeah. It's not gonna take long, right? But at least let me mess up first, right? But in that, I tried to understand that the job was different than playing, but I didn't completely understand that for a full year and a bit.
Now, when we talk about growth and we talk about progression and reaching that next level, because we believe that the next level is always within your reach, but it's about what you're doing in order to get there. And when we talk about you playing, coaching, managing, president and CEO, is there anything specific that you may have learned from one stage that was able to help you at the next level?
Well, there's a coach, a wonderful coach who was a basketball coach for Sheridan College, who sent me this quote, and it said, it's a famous quote by Roosevelt that said, "It's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbled or how the doer of deeds could have done them better. The man who counts is the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error." He says, but it's the man, right, who is actually in the arena, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself or herself in a worthy cause, who in the end knows the enthusiasm or the excitement of high achievement, but who at worst, if they fail while daring greatly. And this is my favorite part, so that their soul shall never rest with those cold and timid souls that know neither victory nor defeat, right? And that was one of those things that kind of reminded me that I needed to compete, right? Just that fire. You know, there are people who are believing you. They're that's the reason you got this opportunity, because there are people who believe in you and they trust in you and they're counting on you. And it was one of those things that kind of gave me a little boost. The one thing that probably went from transition to transition was a quote by Churchill that said, "Success is not final, and failure is not fatal," right? And so in that, what that said to me is that we had this initial success the first year, but that success is not final, right? And more than that, if I can back up a little bit, when you make a transition like that and you become the leader of the group that of your peers, of the group that you were formerly with, right? How you interacted with them, right, as a peer kind of determines your initial success, right? Whether they sort of give you some rope or not, some latitude, right? But regardless, if they do, that success is not final. You still have to understand what your job is now, what your role, what your position is. And your job now is to empower the masses, right? That's what leadership is. It's empowering the masses. And so my job has fundamentally changed. So if I'm unsuccessful at empowering the masses, that success will not be final, right? There will be a day of reckoning if we don't get this right, right? And by the same token, if I didn't have a great relationship or you don't have a good transition, that failure is not fatal, because you do have an ability, right, to work at it and learn and give. Nobody expected me to be a great coach the first week, right? You're gonna have a chance. You're gonna be able to work at this, right? So that if you have that initial failure, that's not fatal. And so for me, in moving from step to step, that quote, I think, probably resonated more than anything else. But I think the true success really is understanding that it is a we thing, right? That if you're the smartest person in the room, it's your own fault, right? It's your job to put people who are competent around you, to put good people around you so that you can move ahead, not having to touch everything. If you're touching everything, it means that you don't trust the people around you. And what will happen is you won't move fast enough. You're going to get stuck, right? And so understanding that you need great people around you, understanding that as a coach, I get better when my players get better. Yeah, I can work hard, I can put all the time in, but when I get better players, I get better, right? It is the players who are going to go out and win the games, not the coaches. We do have, the ability to have an effect on it, but ultimately the players win the game.
Now, you keep mentioning opportunities and someone always being there to prompt you in a certain direction. How much of it has been you being at the right place and meeting that opportunity? And I'm interested in know how much of it was you creating that opportunity.
Right. And, opportunity is this wonderful thing, right? But after opportunity becomes commitment, because people talk about the opportunity a whole lot, right? The opportunity is what it is, right? It's making good on that opportunity. So the same opportunity that you made look wonderful and them wishing they had that opportunity would have ruined them, right? Because we don't have the follow through, right? So let's remember that opportunities are not as they seem, right? They require diligence, right? And most of us think that is within us. So if I had that, I would. No, you probably wouldn't, and that's probably why you don't have that opportunity. So there's probably some things that you need to do so that opportunity will present itself. Because if you were ready, the opportunity is always ready. Having said that, as we speak to that in a very real way, I also believe in my own case, while many of those doors were open, many of those opportunities were presented, I actually wasn't sitting around waiting for those to open, right? I was actually working on realizing other real opportunities, right? So I had real opportunities outside of the game, right? Even while I was still playing. And so while I was, when I became the coach, I already had real opportunities, things that I was really engaged into. And some, I think, that, might have been, more successful from, a financial standpoint than coaching, right? If I had chosen to go in that direction, I think I had built some foundations and some things that would allow me to flourish. So while we say, well, if I had that opportunity, right? I think our job is to be, our responsibility is to be opportunistic, right? I didn't get this opportunity, right, that was the kind of thing that changed my life, right? And, no, I chose that opportunity over other opportunities that already existed, right? So we're already cultivating opportunity, right? Consistently cultivating opportunity. And when the opportunity was presented, I was able to choose that opportunity over another opportunity. So the idea is that we ought to be busy. We ought to be engaged. We ought to be cultivating tomorrow, working on tomorrow all the time. And there is a little bit of a juxtaposition there, right? Because I can't remember the quarterback I heard say he never worked on what was next because that would take his focus away from today, right? And I agree with that. So it's really more about more than cultivating tomorrow, and I think there are some things we do. We store up for tomorrow, like we do some savings, we do some other things, right? But what I believe is when we steward today, tomorrow takes care of itself. So it's actually that process of taking care of today, doing well with today, presenting yourself well today, being good steward over the opportunities you have today is what presents those opportunities tomorrow. Right? So in a very real sense, it is continuing to grind and being present and being a good steward over the opportunities you have that presents additional opportunities.
Now, as you continue to look back at everything, what was the greatest obstacle that you had to overcome?
So in every situation, I had the same obstacle. My greatest obstacle, without question, is actually the guy that I see when I brush my teeth every morning, right? The biggest obstacle is me, right? There's a military saying that says, I count him greater, he who overcomes himself, than he who overcomes his enemies. Okay. You see, that greatest battle is always with self, right? And if that greatest battle is not with self, right? If it's something else, then I become a victim. So if there's something else, whether it be opportunity or whatever it is, that's keeping me from success, right? Now I become a victim to whatever that is, right? I am the greatest impediment to my success, right? And as I look inward, right, and do what I need to do and challenge myself to grow, to become better, to be more diligent, more vigilant, more persistent, whatever that is, whatever that looks like, right? Opportunity seems to find me. And when I do the reverse, right, opportunity tends to elude me. So it really is understanding that, or really feeling in your heart, right, that what you do matters. That what you do is the biggest determinant of your success. It's not the system. It's not where I grew up. It's not any of those other things. The greatest impediment is me. I have the ability to make choices, to do things. And, if you ask me to fly a plane right now, I'm thinking you don't like me very much, right? But you give me a chance to take a class, right? Or two, right? Fly in a simulator, right? And go out as a co-pilot, right? Now all the time. So in other words, it's actually when I put my time in, it's what I do. Right? It's not the fact, right, that, they're not hiring a lot of pilots right now, right? If not a lot, right, that means that they're hiring a few. Yeah. Be one of those, right? Do what it takes to be one of those, right? So we run the process, right? So when our success is not in our control, it's very important to understand that we're victims. So I'm my greatest challenge. There's no question about that. I am the greatest boulder, right? The greatest impediment, right? If there's something that stands in the way of my success more than anything else, it's me.
Now you talk about you versus you. What's the secret? How did you overcome yourself?
I'm a pretty positive person, and in saying that, for me, it's that wonderful balance of understanding that while we talked about all of this kind of, me and overcoming me, it's really not about me, right? It truly isn't. And so for me, when we have this kind of conversation and we talk about success, right, it potentially negates the ultimate, for me, the ultimate purpose in life, and that is really to help people succeed, help people thrive, help people be happy, help people have opportunity, right? And help. It's about others, and in cultivating that that idea, I think we become more fortified. It's hard to feel sorry for yourself when you're helping someone else, right? It's almost impossible to feel sorry for yourself when you're helping someone else. And you say, well, what can I do? How can I help somebody, right? I don't have anything, right? And when we don't understand that we have value, right? There's a buddy told me a story the other day about his little son was on this tram. He was on this like a subway, right? And there was an older guy, kind of, almost, kind of a curmudgeon, if you will, right? Kind of an older guy that wasn't real nice, wasn't real into anything, and his young son just smiled at him. He had this big smile, and he just smiled. He's about 5 years old at the time, and he just kept smiling. He says, by the end of that trip, they were best friends. He was talking with them and playing with them, and all the kid had was a smile, right? That's all we have to offer others, right? And so in that construct, I really haven't answered your question, right? So for me, that talk, that self-talk is one that says this. I tell my wife this, right? We want to try to be able to, give you, have you live in the kind of house you like to live in, drive the kind of car you like to drive in, right? But one of our responsibilities is to learn to live not above our means, not at our means, but below our means, right? And I say, you don't have to work, right? But if you don't work, you need to be prepared to live at whatever level we're able to live comfortably, right? At that level, right? So it could be here, it could be here, right? But more than that, more than all of that, is that we should be willing to live as humble as anybody who walks the face of the earth, and enjoy it and engage that. Not necessarily be happy with it, but be happy. Does that make sense? So it's okay to desire more, right? But I should be willing to live as humbly as the most humble person who walks the face of the earth, and enjoy that, be able to embrace that in some way. And I believe at a cursory point, that's where it starts, is to is just understanding life is not all about all the trappings. It's not about all the fixings. It's being willing to live as humble as possible, and understanding that there is joy to be found there, that there is a real victory to be found. And many times we find that, I think there's some people, if they had nothing, would have a whole lot more.
What would you say is the achievement you're most proud about?
I'm proudest about being the husband of Diane and the father of Rachel, Raven, and Riley, right? That's what I'm most proud of. I think for the answer, we're looking for some of those things that occur in life. And I will give you two things that I think are defining for me. One is being cut from the NFL, from the National Football League. I was cut by the Kansas City Chiefs, who drafted me, and after being cut by Kansas City, I went to Tampa Bay and had a short stint there. And they said they made some decisions early, and they had decided to keep the younger backs. Well, I was 23 years old, and the guy they kept, right, had a really, really good preseason, and great young man, and but we were the same age, right? And he wasn't a returner. I was a returner, and that's why they brought me there more than to be a running back. And the wonderful thing is, I sort of, make an excuse there, right, is that I was good with it. And what followed were about 18 of the happiest months of my life, right? And I was cut, and I went back, so I didn't have to go far. I only had to go 30 minutes, just drive across the causeway, right? Because I'm from that area, so Clearwater is actually where my mom and dad were, or mom and stepdad were living at the time. And so I only had to drive 30 minutes across the causeway. And as when I got back, I just had this wonderful peace. And a gentleman had shared a verse with me in Kansas City, very popular verse, certainly today, Romans 8:28, all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. And I had this wonderful peace about it, and I was grateful that I had the opportunity. I had a year to play professional football. Now I was content. I still had 2 classes left, so I had to go back to William & Mary and finish up. But before that, I went back to Honeywell. They took me back. So from September to January, I worked at Honeywell. And then I went back to finish my last 2 classes. And then they were going to, bring me back. And I was going to work at Honeywell. So had this thing figured out. And during that time, though, what was more special is I became the youth director at my church. And I went from professional football to driving this big yellow bus on Friday nights. And I would take them to places that they wouldn't ordinarily get a chance to go, right? And that got them more engaged in church. So our youth choir grew by leaps and bounds, right? It tripled in size, right? Our youth outreach, it was just, and and at that time, we weren't as progressive in youth outreach and those kind of things in churches at that time, if you can go back to the 80s, right? So I had one of the most fertile times in my life. Diane and I, my wife, were dating at the time, and that relationship got richer. We were in the same place at one time for like 4 or 5 months in a row. Like the first time we probably had been together that long in a row, because I was we were both in school at the time, and it was kind of moving around and never in the same place at the same time. And so that time in my life was one of the most fertile times in my life. And then, right, so I didn't make the excuse about, oh, I should be playing, this, or I should be. No. I had a wonderful opportunity to play that. And now I'm moving on to this, right? And I wasn't, I'm sitting around waiting for somebody to pick me up, or I'm a pro football player. No, I work at Honeywell, right? And I'm the youth director at my church, and such pride in that, and I love that, and I love that more than I loved the year that I played in the NFL. And so for me, that was a suggestion. It's probably the answer to your first question. Who am I, right? And so I'm just a simple guy, right? Who loves people, who loves the Lord, and wants the best for people. And I'm not always good at what I desire to do, right? Wanting the best for people, right? Because sometimes I get a little selfish, right? So I'm not always great at it. I'm relatively consistent, right? Though, and then I think the other moment would be when I won the championship as a coach. When you win it as a player, it's a euphoric out-of-body experience, and it's just wonderful. It is. But it's about you, and it's about your teammates and all of that. And you're happy for everybody. But coaching takes it to another level for me. When I won as a coach, I won 40 times. Because I won for every guy on that team. Everybody had a different story. And the stories are so much more poignant when you know the little things about the guys. You know the guy who wasn't going to sign back, right? Not because he didn't like you, not because he didn't like the program, but because he wasn't sure we could win the championship, right? But you told him that we were going somewhere. Believe me, believe the process, right? This is what's happening. This is where we are now. This is where we're going, right? And this is where we're going to be, right? And when all of that comes to fruition, and you see a guy who stands as the captain of your team, who potentially would have been on another team, and he stands there with that cup, being a Canadian too, understanding the history and everything behind it, that's a beautiful thing. When you see another guy who stands up and says, the day before the game that I lost my brother, and I wear the number that I wear because that was his birthday. And he says, for the first time in my life, I'm with a group of people who don't just care for me as a football player. They care for me, right, like a brother. And when you see that level of commitment and brotherhood, when guys really truly come together, and his mother and father came to the game, and we won afterwards, and you see him with the trophy, there's a different sense, a different feeling, equally proud, right? But even a different feeling, a different sense that it's bigger than the game, right? And as a player, it seems to be all about the game, right? We're champions, right? And it's true, you are champion players. And as a coach, I realized that they were champion people.
Wow, it's been awesome. It's been great. There's been so many lessons that can be extracted from your journey. And I love the fact that you talked about one of your moments of quote unquote failure as one of the most memorable one. But I would really wanted to go in depth with that, but we're gonna leave it there because we can stay here probably for another 5 or 6 more hours. As the good book says, the end of a matter is better than its beginning. So we'll end it there so we can get these lessons out to other people as well, so they can also take it and apply them to their lives as well. Thank you.